Live, like right now. Go.
Great to be with you. It's James Rosebush here.
Me too, Robert Hunter, and this is the Break It Down Show.
Yeah, we're going to talk about current events. And I guess, fellas, what's more interesting to you right now? Is it still Israel, or do you want to start with Ukraine and catch up on that? What do you guys want to talk about?
Well, you know, that's a very interesting point that you just made, because you cited two very difficult and challenging contests right there, but there are a dozen others we can talk about as well. So
yeah,
you know, that is really the complexity of the world right now, and I think there are 31 different hotspots that are actually in some kind of military conflict right now. So I think maybe we should do a tossed salad, put them all in there.
I would say that the most important security issue facing the United States right now is on the southern border of our country. It's also the one with the greatest political impact on the election, assuming we have one on November 4th.
Couldn't agree more. You think we may not have an election?
Oh, I'm being facetious.
You're being silly. Okay.
But you never know with all the chatter and the blather on the mainstream media whether anything is going to happen tomorrow.
I couldn't agree with you more, Robert, my neighbor. I think that, you know, we have an invasion we have no sovereignty as a country. So we have an invasion on our southern border, but we haven't mentioned, I think, what can be the most costly to the US, and that is China, because there's no question that with what Xi said last week in his speech, that he's cranking up and in a movement into Taiwan without any question, I think. And that is going to be the biggest challenge, I think, for the U.S. Europe is complex. The Middle East could be a much bigger front than we think what is happening right now. I mean, we were sitting on pins and needles, I think, to see who actually did the dirty work in Iran day before yesterday. But that was an interesting report that we got earlier today about who did that. But I think with the Houthis, and the thing is, there are so many different elements. It's like it used to be, or if you could have one enemy, you might be able to deal with it. But the enemies that we have are so complicated. I mean, Israel is terribly complicated. All the other factors are interrelated with you have Africa involved. You have other Middle Eastern countries involved, and they've all got special interests. But it's a web, really, don't you think, Robert?
Well, first on the China thing, it's sort of he said, she said. I don't think there's going to be an invasion.
That's clever. That's clever.
Yeah. Oh, I just thought of that while you were talking. I think that the idea of going after Taiwan this year, or maybe even ever, is just not in the cards. China's got too much else going on right now, and as long as American politicians keep their mouths shut about how we see Taiwan going, as opposed to the old Shanghai Communique, I don't think China's going to do it. Now, if we're going to move to the most immediate with regard to the Middle East, you talked about challenges to the United States. It's interesting. Russia continues to be a major competitor and may pose threats to allies and maybe at some point to us. China is clearly going to be a major competitor to the United States with a whole range of things. What's happening now with Israel and in Gaza has serious consequences, but it's not in the same league in terms of competition or any threat directly to the United States, unless things get out of hand. And what I'm most worried about right now is as Jim, as you're saying, there's so many players, there's so many angles, there's so many people doing different things that are interconnected. I hate using certain overwrought analogies, but I wonder whether we're at a time where there might be a Sarajevo moment by somebody miscalculating, going over the line, and then all hell breaks loose. You already mentioned what happened in Iran yesterday. Uh, Very likely it was some more homegrown element, whether it was ISIS or the Taliban or the Mujahideen, rather than Israel or the United States, which is trying to take the distance from it. But it still could explode, and then we would be off and running to something really very, very serious for everybody and for including us.
Robert,
I
I want to go back.
Yeah.
The show's called Break It Down, right? So
Yeah.
let me go back to what you said about China, which he said, she said, right? Which I think is you said. I want to break this down though. You said that you thought that the threat against Taiwan was not imminent, even though she mentioned it because China has a lot of its own domestic issues. But isn't that precisely the situation we see with Russia, for example? I think these actors, because they're having trouble domestically in their economy, military, China, yeah, China's got a lot of domestic problems. But doesn't that, with these actors today, doesn't that give them a personality, a personal drive, a need to prove themselves on the world stage because their domestic programs, their domestic policy hasn't really worked? Yeah, China's got a lot of domestic problems. But what I worry about is China's in the hands, Russia's in the hands of both of them, and as well as a dozen other countries are in charge. In charge, you see bad actors. So I'm not sure that what you said, I guess from my thinking, what you said is logical, but are these leaders logical? They want to promote themselves as I think every day about when I first went to the Soviet Union when I was 20 years old, and I think every day about that. Is a long time ago, but I think every day about the first time I went there, and I'm thinking to myself today, what kind of a great economy, what a wonderful country could be, robust economy, the culture of Russia, all this sort of thing. And yet what we have is we've got a bad actor running that country. And so I worry about China.
Well, I think it's good to worry about China, but I don't see a parallel there. They don't have a land frontier with Taiwan. They have been very cautious about not picking fights with other folks. They don't have even the excuse that the Russians have of, quote, being surrounded by the West. There has not been a Cold War coming out of. They don't have this kind of, they do have this historical thing that Taiwan belongs to us, but there was a huge moat in between the two. And if they look, as somebody was saying the other day, that the Russians might have taken 350,000 casualties just as a neighbor that they thought was a pushover. What about Taiwan? There's also U.S. military there. Whether we right or not, we've made certain pledges. I don't think Mr. Xi needs a headache like that at this point. And particularly, one of the things that is a mutual assured destruction as between us and China, which we used to have with the Soviet Union, I'm going to try to invent a term now, mutual assured economic destruction, MAED, our dependence on one another, not like it was in 1914 when we were told there couldn't be a First World War because of the economic independence. But I just don't think, at least in the short term, unless we do something stupid, there's going to be a war with China or China trying to get Taiwan. And if we get to the end of 2024 and I prove to be wrong, I wasn't on this program.
I want to add in something on the tactical side, and it's a very important point to put people in metal objects. Look, Putin struggled to get tanks to go towards Kiev. This is on land. He had to keep it on a road because his tanks couldn't go across dirt. When you put tanks on dirt, they break. if you put metal boats going across that hunk of water, they're going to put a lot of Chinese people on the bottom of that ocean. And that is really, it is just a fact. It's very hard to land a force across that body of water in particular. So could they do it? Yes. Would it be extremely hard to do it effectively? Would everybody know they are about to do it? Yes. And so if it does happen, boy, oh boy, that gives us a big problem. You got to have a carrier group show up and you have to say, not today, and I don't know if we have the people to do that. So let's just play with this a little bit. If troops started railheading, which is also a very dangerous, it doesn't seem like this is hard, but it's very dangerous. People are going to break their backs. People are going to fall off of flat cars, and all kinds of chaos is going to happen, but you will see it. And they're going to start moving all of these items across the country from all the places where you have to make them, and they're going to mass up right across from the other side of Taiwan. And you guys, this is where your guys' specialty comes in when that happens. And look, I have no problem with Secretary Austin, the dude, but we've seen this guy give us a lot of bad news, standing behind his dais, like, hey, I don't know how many Americans are there, nor can I protect them. He said this several times during his.
Can I try a break it down distinction?
Please.
I would say what's going on with Israel and Gaza is a tactical issue that could become strategic if it got out of hand. The things with Russia is definitely strategic because of everything that's involved. But the thing with China is grand strategic. And I'm less worried about China going for Taiwan than I am about how we and China are going to cope with one another for the future. And for our perspective in particular, how are we coping with, and will we cope with having a competitor with more capacity than the Soviet Union ever had, except for some nuclear weapons. Jim, you went to Soviet Union when you were 20. I don't know what year that meant. My first time was in 1965. And I said to myself then, looking at some of the stuff, I said, except for their military stuff and their nukes, why are we taking this place seriously? But China, when I look at what they do economically and the challenge to our leadership in that regard, I think this is very serious indeed. And psychologically, if no other reason, we aren't doing a very good job of dealing with that.
I think you make a really good point, Robert, about the distinction between the tactical intelligence that we have and the strategic intelligence, and how we operate in both of those fields. Because I think in let's say centuries past, we were really focused on the tactical. And I think today, in terms of intelligence, we have to be focused more on what motivates people. And I think this is a really interesting and important point. So you see, for example, last week, the news that was maybe, we also have to be careful of this. Is the news media being influenced? Are these stories that are being created? But last week we had the story that Putin was, if you remember, you saw this, indicating that he might be in favor of a ceasefire. Well, then he must have heard that story as well, because bang, he comes back this week, right, with a much stronger effect, militarily speaking. So, but to actually peel these people apart and figure out not only their motivation, but their what makes them move in one direction or another is a much more psychological kind of I think piece of homework for our military, our intelligence operations. We got to know what's really going to make them move tactically is what they are inside, internally, strategically, from a strategic basis. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. I remember that when Caspar Weinberger was our Secretary of Defense, and right after that, he wrote a book about the next war, which was all going to be, according to what he saw, it wasn't going to be necessarily a military war. It was going to be a war of intelligence, and he was really focusing on digital intelligence at that time in an early way. But couldn't we say that to be true? I mean, we're still engaged using munitions, but this leads us into down the path that I think we, at least, and I think both of us agree on this, that the world is collapsing because of the lack of leadership from our country. So all of these theaters that are, they're in a collision course either with themselves or with various antagonists, because the U.S. has not been leading the way and not saying this is what, and right in front in our garage, I think about 10 days ago, Robert and I came up with, what do we call it, Robert? A grand strategy. And believe me, the leader of the grand strategy was the United States, because the United States is missing in action. That's absolutely absolutely true. The United States is missing in action. And look at all the people that are bearing the cost of that, not to mention the condition that the world is in, that has an effect far greater than just the number of people that are being hurt and killed, but also redirecting our economy, and getting us focused on things that really are not productive in terms of society.
Well, you put a lot in there, and I'll just pick up on a couple of things. One, what are people actually saying and what do you believe in? We can get into that if you want. I don't believe anybody in the media anymore. Single source. I look a lot of places in order to try to make up my mind, because I have very little confidence in the mainstream media. That's why I watch the Break It Down show whenever it's possible, because then you get people who might. Jim, I haven't seen you on CNN. I haven't seen me on CNN, or God forbid the news hour on PBS. Maybe you should be. Maybe I should be. Who knows? Now, in terms of moving to the digital, one thing about the way we have dealt with classical armory, and now with drones, etc., is we're learning how they work. I'll tell you, militaries don't like going into battle with stuff they don't know what the effects are going to be. And right now, the whole digital thing, nobody knows. But let's come back to, I think, what your central point was. What I know, I want to say one other thing. One other thing that worries me most of all right now, we've got long-term with China, Taiwan, of course, but long-term with China. We've got a stalemate, more or less, on the Ukraine Russia front, which might tip one way or the other, but I don't see it going decisively one way or another, unless, God forbid, the Russians decided to introduce nuclear weapons. But I who knows? I don't believe in that. But the one I worry about for having a short-term dramatic impact is the Middle East, in part because the distances are so short, and because the number of actors are so big, and the amount of weapons that somebody can do something intelligent or stupid with are so much. Let's go back to 2 weeks before the dreadful tragedy, the mass murders of October 7th. The National Security Advisor of the United States of America wrote in Foreign Affairs magazine, supposedly the place where we get everything from, and he said, nothing's going to happen in the Middle East. Other problem, not in the Middle East. And then after October 7th, they quickly had on the internet to do a new version to erase what he'd said, like people used to be on the top of Lenin's tomb. They used to erase politicians to disappear. And I worry about that. When you talk about in the Persian Gulf and Iran versus the others, you're talking about 3 or 4 minutes flight time. You're not talking about something that would, if you want to go across the Taiwan Straits, or even if you try to do something with Russia and Ukraine. That's what gets me. When you had this assassination in Beirut a few days ago, and you had this thing in Iran yesterday, we don't even know. All of a sudden, people are saying, is the balloon going to go up everywhere?
Well, also, Robert, you're talking there about a religious war. It's a religious conflict,
In
and
part,
that drives passions not only to do something, and you have a religious conflict there that has been going on for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, and hasn't been solved. And you see today, to be able to create, and I think one of the reasons that Reagan really didn't spend, one of my disappointments about the president that I worked for, was that Reagan didn't spend more time on the Middle East and going to the Middle East, because he was a powerful president. But he also, remember, employed that statement, don't ever start a war you don't know you've already won. And he believed that
which
he
were
couldn't
true.
really win in the Middle East. The question is, can we ever win in the Middle East? Could there ever be peace in the Middle East? Well, we'd like to think that wherever we think about, whatever part of the world we're thinking about, we'd like to think that there could be peace. People pray for peace. They sing about peace, blah, blah, blah. But there you've got a historic religious war that it's different. It's much more complex. And it also spills out into other cultures, as we've seen in our own country. This tremendous unveiling of anti-Semitism that was apparently there all these decades in all these institutions, but it required this, what happened to actually peel it back and see that it was there. Well, hello, this is something that it has to be addressed, but it's religious wars.
So maybe we should focus again, our maestro there, a bit more on what's going on in the Middle East. Best we can probably hope for, from our perspective as Americans, is a degree of what we call stability that is relatively absence of conflict, in which we have a few interests. We have a very special interest in regard to Israel, which goes way back to the nation. It picks up on what happened in the history of anti-Semitism, especially what happened in the Holocaust. Nothing like that has happened since then, thank God, at least in areas of the world we care about, or with peoples that we Americans care about, leave aside Africa and Rwanda and places like that. And there are components to it. Some of it is Sunni Shia, and that came up in particular after the Iranian Revolution of 1979. But to a great extent, for a period of time, that was relatively stabilized. We had a great moment, which was working positively, which was when we got the Egypt-Israel peace treaty, which took the Arab-Israeli conflict out of the U.S.-Soviet confrontation. Because as soon as that was done, the chances of an Arab state or a coalition of Arab states having a chance to have a war with Israel and prevailing went to zero. And as a result, the chances of an escalation from something between Israel and its neighbors leading to a U.S.-Soviet confrontation also went to zero. Now, it didn't last all that long. A lot of other things came along, and a lot of that has to, I would say, squandered opportunities, maybe squandered opportunities on every side, but brought us around to where we are this year with this thing that happened with Hamas taking off the way it did. But that didn't come out of the clear blue sky either.
No.
That came because of various missed opportunities over a period of time. And because, as I'm arguing, I know, Jim, if you agree, or Pete, if you agree, I worry that something could go wrong even while we're talking. My worry, I've been in the Middle East business for a long time and talked about it. And I always say, every time I give a speech on the Middle East, I'm worried I'm going to walk out of the room and somebody's going to say, Did you just hear about what
Yeah.
happened in the Middle East? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's I guess I'll jump in and I'll say something about that, because it is true, and Tariq Siddiqui has been talking about, you know, the Palestinian point of view, and we're never going to settle out who is right, who is wrong. There is no dividing line. There is no right and wrong. This is going to always be contentious, and I worry that we'll never get to the end of this. You know, we have a war, and usually when you get to war, it's because you run out of words. And the war is made to make someone impose their will on somebody else, you know, bow their neck and say, I give up. And I don't know that we'll ever get there. It has to be beastly. It has to be grisly. It has to be awful. And the cost is going to be decades long. You know, you'll see all kinds of impacts from, look, I'm a guy that knows war, and it will not stop. Even if you don't see it day to day, there will be ghastly things, suicides, families destroyed for a long time, just like it has in the past. And so when we see these things, it's a failure of our ability to figure out what the solution is. And I just don't think in this area there is a long-term solution for whatever reason. We're just never going to sort that out. And people are going to disagree with me from the second we start talking about this, because there is no solution, and this is the rub about this. So I'll get out of the way and let you guys talk. But it's such a challenging thing, because as soon as you open your mouth about it, the emotions go through the roof, and people want to fight you about what the right answer is.
Well, I'm not sure that I would say that I have the right answer to be able to solve these conflicts, but I do recognize that people, or the people who control particular assets, look for opportunities. They look for opportunities. And that is what a sovereign country needs to protect their people against, that there's an opportunity. This is exactly what's happened at our southern border. Okay. So the administration has, opened it. I mean, at least they fail to close our southern border. What is it? It's an opportunity. That where there are intelligence failures to secure the people of any country adequately, there are going to be people that take an opportunity, that take this as an opportunity. The same thing with Putin and with Ukraine. So he saw an opportunity, he saw a window to do it. So what was stopping him? You know, I think today we have to be super alert, 24/7, to making sure that we are not an opportunity for our enemy on any level, militarily, morally, whatever it is. I think you have to be super alert to protecting your family, your community against some kind of untoward activity that is going to damage or hurt you, your country, as I say, your city, your whatever it is. I think we had to be extremely alert to that, because I think there are people walking the earth that whether they're countries or whether they're military forces or whatever, you see this in Africa a lot. There are small, medium-sized armies in a number of African countries right now that are taking an opportunity, because these countries don't have the ability to defend themselves. Now, in the case of the Palestinians and the Israelis, it may very well have been that the Israelis opened an opportunity for the Palestinians to do what they did. Well, okay, can you say the Palestinians had their strategy that they wanted to play? Is the Israelis had their strategy? Maybe they didn't play it as well. But I think it'll all be sorted out. And when people really review actually what happened, I mean, now we get intelligence reports that, like Robert said, do we believe what we're hearing about what Israel's lack of vigilance in terms of intelligence? I don't know, but it'll be sorted out at some time. But I think that point about opportunity, there are too many countries that are providing an opportunity for the people who don't want to see them succeed to enter in.
I want to ask you this, because there is a history of something similar And so I'm stretching, but maybe the answer is there are Rhodesians that walk the earth, but there is no Rhodesia. Do we end up in a situation like that where there is never going to be a Palestine, but there are Palestinians that are on the earth? I mean, there are Chaldeans, there are Assyrians, there are Kurds, but they do not have a country.
Well, there are Californians who may or may not be part of the United States. Sorry about that. I know where you are, Pete. We on the East Coast, California is what happened when they turned the United States on the side and everything loose fell to the bottom. But
we prefer the term California. Yeah.
Let's go back to the Palestinian thing.
Yeah.
We have certain interests there. I was talking about Israel. We have to talk about the flow of oil. We have the idea about Americans and others being able to do business. We have people being protected against terrorism. We have to remember going back on that. Incidentally, and then it's a question about, as Jim says, there are all kinds of stuff going on. Well, some matter beyond the individual countries and some don't. And one has to make choices. A lot of things that happen in some of the Central American or South American, I shouldn't say Central American, South American or African countries are tragedies there, but they're not going to affect our lives. Other places that is untrue. They are going to affect other lives. We can also go back to the history of the Arab-Israeli relationship. I used to say, everybody knows that between about 1896 with Mr. Jabotinsky and others, all the way up till now, let's say 3,000 incidents. Everybody agrees on the 3,000 incidents, but there are at least two sides for every one. You tell me when history starts, and I'll tell you which side is right. That's useless.
Yeah.
Big question, I would say, is can Israeli Jews live with Palestinians in this particular area of the world? Is it possible? I like to believe it is possible. And the question is, how can one or several or the peoples themselves find a way to do it? Most Palestinians, one has to recognize the Jewish people over time have been one of the most talented people who have ever walked the face of the earth. Well, within the Arab world, Palestinians are the Jews of the Arab world. They're the middle class, they're the entrepreneurs, they're the lawyers, unfortunately. You look at all the stuff that's built in the Persian Gulf, the architects have tended to be Palestinians, et cetera, et cetera. So these are people, these aren't people coming out of the desert as were Bedouins a couple of generations ago. These are people who have fundamentally opportunity to be middle-class people. And how do we figure out for them to go beyond their own history, go beyond the strife, and to go beyond what the people are the mischief makers. How do we get beyond the mischief makers on both sides? We got some incredible mischief makers on both sides. How do we get the majority of the people, Jews and non-Jews, Palestinians, who want to live together? All the polling shows that a great majority of Israelis, a great majority of Palestinians want to get beyond this. Unfortunately, the people running things on both sides don't want to move beyond it.
I think that largely, I agree with you, that people don't understand that in Israel, millions of Jews and Palestinians live together. They work together. They have all kinds of activities together, and that has been, healthcare, other things. And I think they know that they need each other, but it's the controlling factors that make that. I think maybe they even see that and they think, well, this isn't right. That our two peoples are living in harmony and being productive, helping each other. But we've seen, and it's been proven, that can be achieved. But there are people who don't want to see that happen. I mean, this is what we have to realize. You see an example of people living productively and harmoniously in different cultures. You see this, see this in every country that's a multicultural state. But you see people who don't want that, and then those are the bad actors that throw the whole concept out and into turmoil, and use that as an opportunity to damage, murder, kill, and rape people on both sides.
One of the fascinating things, and this may not be a universal rule, is that when people come from conflict zones, maybe going way back, and they come to live in the United States, or let's say in Canada, which is very similar in terms of what I'm talking about, they don't get into fights with one another. You don't have, during the Bosnia War, the Muslims and the Serbians and the Croatians going out in the street and murdering one another. You don't have Jews and Palestinians murdering one another here. I know that there was a big struggle between Italians and Irish for a while, but they don't go fight with one another. Even the Catholic and the Protestant Irish, who slaughtered one another for a long time in Northern Ireland, don't slaughter one another here. They may not go to the same bars. So it shows that people of these cultures can, if the people who exploit the divisions don't happen to be in control, that they can manage themselves quite well. So I'm going to pose a question now. What are the choices between Palestinians and, I'm going to use the word Israel because the majority there happen to be Jewish, but I don't mean to just characterize it as that. Do you have to have a two-state solution, or can you live together in one state? That's in some ways the operational issue that's coming as we look at the time when the baddest actor of all right now, the ones that are used, I'm not talking about the right wingers and the Knesset and that sort of thing, or some of the people in Lebanon. I'm talking about Hamas right now, the ones who have been prosecuting that particular war, and then the overreaction, at least as seen on television by Mr. Netanyahu and others. But let's say once Hamas ceased to be a factor, is it going to be possible to work towards a two-state solution, or is that already dead? I don't know the answer to that. I'd wonder what you guys think.
Well, I think that we had with the David Accords, I think we had a movement in the right direction there. We had investment taking place, and we also had support from other countries that had previously had specific strategic interests. And I think the whole region was going in the right direction. Now, everything's blown up. But that also is an example of what I think we should be talking about as well. And that is the role of the United States, which has been basically set aside by, yes, Ukraine wants desperate to have the support of the United States. But is it just our military support? Or is it our strategic support and our ability to lead the rest of the world with clarity of purpose? And because it is, in my viewpoint, the whole reason that the United States was created was to shine a light and provide an ideal of individual freedom and liberty for the rest of the world. And we haven't been standing up to or communicating our role in that way. We've been acting like just another country. Okay, we're another country. We've got this economy. We've got military capabilities. We've got educated people. We got, so do other countries. What makes the United States different, and what is its responsibility? And I think that is the greatest tragedy of what is happening right now. And I long for our country to turn back to seizing its rightful role in the world, why it was put here, to be a demonstration of how multicultural life can be when it is committed to the ideals that are set forth in our Constitution. And that is the example that we have to set, and not only just for Americans and people migrating here, but for the rest of the world. And that means that we stand up and we stand on a solid block of principles that we know works. And in order to perpetuate that kind of, why does everyone want to come to America? Because they see America as a place where they can have free expression, where they can create things, they can create companies, they can create wealth for themselves. I mean, this is the history of America, is people coming here from other countries and creating wealth for their families and stability. And if mostly important, the freedom to think and to act in the interest of their families. But it isn't just something that is a handout. It's something that has to be worked for, and it has to be supported, and it has to be understood for its purpose. And if you've ever been to, Robert, you probably have, as I have, a ceremony for people who are becoming citizens of the United States. They have to go through a litany of, they have to learn a lot more about our country than probably 80% of all current citizens actually know. But the pride that they feel, the gratitude, I mean, you see tears streaming down their eyes that they're becoming citizens of America. Well, the United States. Well, why is that? It's because so far America has assured and protected their individual liberty. And this is part of the ideal of America and why it was placed here. But we need leadership that not only understands that and supports it, and is sharing that with the rest of the world, but standing up and telling these other countries precisely for our own purposes, to protect our own people, this is what you're going to do. We are the most powerful country in the world, and for a good reason. We're using it for good, but this is what you've got to do. And I think this is something that Robert and I talked about really in our grand plan of getting the leadership of this country to basically to say, not to apologize, but to say to these bad actors, this is what you're going to do, or you're not going to have you're not going to be successful. Number one, and number two, ultimately in history, and number two, you're not going to be an ally of the United States, which is the most powerful and effective form of government known to man, which is to protect individual freedom and liberty.
I can summarize in one word, which is amen. In fact, you talk about how the country was founded. We were so lucky to have a Declaration of Independence and a Constitution, which sometimes by the Supreme Court gets, at different times in history, gets messed around with. That's another matter. We're the only country I know of that was founded on ideals and on principles without reference to ethnicity. And one of the things about the Statue of Liberty, the give me a tired or you're poor, a lot of it was people getting away from the different way of doing politics and life at that time in European countries, and now some other people. I think one of the great failures of the United States in the last, let's say, quarter century is to allow things to go on, particularly in Central America, without our getting far more involved to help these societies get to a point where people will stay at home. Because who would want to come someplace else if you could live at home and still have freedoms and opportunities? And we dropped the ball big time. I remember 35 years ago in which I was in a meeting with Ted Kennedy, who I used to work for him. And he said in this meeting, he said, we're going to have to solve the problem of unemployment in Mexico. We're going to solve it there, or we're going to have to solve it here. And unfortunately, we're now having to solve it here. I look at the mayor of Chicago yesterday complaining about illegal immigrants being bussed up from Texas to Chicago. Well, I can understand people in Texas wanting to do that, but we're not dealing with that root issue of helping to spread what we have an opportunity to do. We put $100 and some odd billion into Ukraine. I wish we could have put that $100 and some odd billion into helping people in Central America. Now let me come back to something very fundamental, which Jim is saying, which is American leadership. And this is a bipartisan point. A lot of what we're seeing in a number of these places, some of it went wrong under Trump, some of it's gone wrong under Biden, some of it wrong even earlier. So I think we can say there's been a problem of leadership of both political parties, of at least two of the institutions, the Congress and the Supreme Court, and I would also say the media, and a failure of our education system. How many Americans are now required to learn civics, are required to learn the fundamentals of our country? Jim, you talked about going to a ceremony where you become an American citizen. In the process of doing it, my wife became an American citizen, 30 some odd years ago, 40 years ago now. And I went to her ceremony. And among other things, you have to renounce allegiance, here it comes, to any foreign prince or potentate. That's why I'm against people having two passports, two citizenship. That's nonsense. But the process of learning American history to become an American citizen is a joke. My wife got asked 3 questions. She highly educated, studied hard for it. She got asked 3 questions. How many branches of government? 3. What is today? It happened to be Martin Luther King's birthday. How many amendments to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights? 10. Congratulations, you're a U.S. citizen. Give me a break. I also believe, quite frankly, citizenship tests should be given in the English language. Well, maybe you could let people in, provided they learn English. As Bill Richardson, who's died last year, who was part Irish and part Mexican, used to say, I don't worry about people coming from Latin America. I do if the next generation doesn't learn English, functions in English, so they can function in the U.S. economy, rather than being kept in the hewers of wood and drawers of water in parts of our society where they can pick strawberries and they're not able to do other things. Lots of people lift themselves up, but if you want to be an American citizen, you've got to be an American citizen. Incidentally, I saw scrolling in here, care about what's going on here in citizenship, but don't give a damn, it says about the Palestinians. We need to care about what's happening with Jews in Israel, with other people in Israel, and care about Palestinians and about others. And right now, we have to find a way to help Israelis and Palestinians find a way to live with one another. And incidentally, since the British and French left the Middle East in 1947, they left the Levant, and then the British got out of the rest in 1968, we have been the outside power most responsible for doing things there and help. And we got to do it. We have to do it. And various administrations have dropped the ball. But I'm most worried of all about getting leadership in this country and finding opportunities for really good people to run for high office. I don't know, I'm going to get in real trouble with my side. Jim, you probably won't agree with me. Maybe you do, I don't know. I'm appalled at the idea that we're going to have a rerun this year of the election.
Oh my God.
Of the last
I'm with you on that.
Just thank you, candidates. We failed as a society.
Yeah. I mean, just second terms are always bad anyhow. And then didn't we get enough of these guys the first time? Can we just...
Jim, I want to hear from you.
I think you might be surprised, but I'm with you on that. I think that I wish we could stop and start over again and really kind of take the battlefield or get the slate wiped clean and start with candidates who speak to what the American people really want in leadership. And I think you would see that the reason we have the situation we're in now, I think, is a high degree of fear about the future of America. And there's so much fear about it that's why you see large numbers of people migrating to what they think would be a person who's strong enough to, I think, buck that trend of where people think America is going, which is down the tank. So they think this is because I get asked this question all the time. Why do all these people like, supporting this one candidate? That is the only answer that I have, because I see, I'm out there speaking, I'm talking to people all the time, and they're pleading, and I have no power whatsoever. I just happen to have worked for a great president who was a great leader that they love. But why? They're afraid. I don't think people understand this. There's a tremendous, tremendous fear in our country that among people who've lived, enjoyed, and have been proud of our country, and they feel that America and Americans are losing their individual freedoms and liberty, and that our country has been taken over by people that they don't agree with, and they think that if they support one person who's strong enough, or they think is strong enough, then that will protect the country from degradation. And I think that this is a real and genuine concern. And I think having a slate of candidates or a candidate who could come forward and exhibit enough strength to gain the confidence of voters in a clear way, not the person who's been there before and has all this baggage, but could assert themselves in a way that it would assuage people's fear. There is tremendous fear in this country among a majority of Americans, by the way. This is not a minority, but that our country has been taken over, and they want by people who don't share the great American dream. And it's the only way that I can explain it. And it's tragic for our country, because we are one of the greatest things about America is that we have a principle that we are all one. We are not divided. We're not divided by economics, by class, by race, by the whole ideal of America is that we are one. And and we are one in terms of not only the way we treat each other and support each other, but also what we believe in, our main principles. And the only answer that I have for the very unfortunate and scary situation that we're in right now is that the reason for it is this tremendous fear of losing our country. And how are we going to keep it?
Well, I think there's several parts to that. In terms of getting good candidates, it's very difficult to recruit people if you know that your total life is going to be exposed and that the media is going to do everything it can to destroy you.
Totally agree.
Every time I'm asked by somebody who wants to run for president, what are the lessons I need? Number one lesson, anything that has ever happened in your life is going to come out. Anything. Yeah. Because somebody will find it to destroy you. My rule about this, having worked for a number of people who ran for president, including 3 presidents, is that you show me somebody who runs for president who sincerely says, I don't hate the media, and I'll show you a liar. Okay. Jefferson said, if you had to choose between the press and government, I'd rather choose the press, because you need that in order to have government. So that's one element, getting people to run. In fact, I was asked by a Democratic friend of mine, if Biden weren't to run, who would you put up? I gave him a list of 10 names. Now, Jim, I'm not going to ask you to do this right now, but let's say if Mr. Trump dropped out, could you or somebody else come up with a list of 7, 8, 9 Republicans who could run, who might fulfill your sense of the ideals? I suspect you could do it. I don't think either of us really like the last president we had because of this, despite what he may have done that was good, et cetera, et cetera. But his personal behaviors are not something I think we want to see in the White House once again. But on top of that, you're absolutely right. When it comes to people seeing fears about their own situation, some of that happens because of transition within a society. We are finally coming to terms with the aftermath of slavery, which was, 150 years ago. So you can have a candidate for president of the United States on the hustings a couple of weeks ago was asked, what were the causes of the Civil War? And she couldn't even come up with the word slavery. Well, okay, she's from South Carolina, so that's so obvious. Had to get that. It is, but now we have, and one of the things that happened with the pandemic, we discovered as a society how dependent we are on working people, so many of whom are Black, Hispanic, other people who aren't considered mainstream. We have a lot of people in the white community who see themselves being displaced. There are a lot of whites out there, white middle class people, Appalachia and other places like that, who feel they're being displaced in part through globalization. Their jobs disappeared. They were taken abroad. So, and that is a group of people who are not being paid attention to and who have a lot of fears. So we have to have people in leadership positions, not just the presidency, but also in Congress. And it has a lot to do with the funding of people for candidacy, for running for office, who are going to be able to speak to the legitimate fears, the legitimate aspirations of people from all parts of our society, so we can again become e pluribus unum, which right now we aren't. So I think if we turned up our television sets, we might find we're in better shape than you learn on the evening news. Or the hour news.
You mentioned a critical word there, Robert. And as you know, I'm writing a book called The Rise of Politics and the Decline of Leadership. Leader. What is a leader? Who is a leader? And it's as I write this, it becomes increasingly complicated to define what a real leader is. And, I've had to go back to really the beginnings of tribes, animal tribes, human tribes, all that sort of thing. Where did this idea of leadership generate? Where did it come from? And, you see books like Kissinger's book where he's talking about people that he worked with and he knew that he considered leader. I don't necessarily agree with all of the people he had in that book, but and you raise a very important point about why would anyone want to run for political office today? Because their life is they're terrorized. It's the same thing with Supreme Court justice nominees, all this sort of thing. So the media certainly has a lot to do with their drive for news at the expense of an individual who wants to dedicate their life to public service. That is inhibiting people from coming forward and being the leaders that we need. No question. I totally agree with that 100%. But what are the ingredients that we need in a human being to selflessly commit themselves to being an expression of energy and values and love is really what it comes down to. Love of country, love of your neighbor, love of your community, love of your nation and what it stands for. You've got to be a person who shows the kinds of qualities that you would like to see expressed in a large majority of people. And you have to stand as an example. And I have to say that why don't we have more of these? At one time in my life, I was involved in starting a leadership academy. And I thought it was very interesting because at the time I did a survey and the idea of leadership academies was all over the place. People were starting leadership academies. But I like to say that the more leadership programs we had, the fewer leaders we actually had as a result. And it was very puzzling to me because a lot of people, they like to teach what leadership is and so forth. But I'm not sure that our culture has moved in the direction of selfless demonstration of service, where real leadership comes from. You have to have the desire to put a lot of your own personal agenda aside and sacrifice to serve your community, your state, your government, the world, people that are in positions. I think today is that something that is really honored. I want to start a show. I've been working with the public television in California about this, called The Heroes Among Us. I believe that there are leaders who do heroic things in communities, but they're the heroes that are the unsung heroes. To be a leader in a public position, you have to be willing to sacrifice, like Robert said, a lot of your own life. And you have to make sure that you didn't beat up a kid in grade school, because it's going to be right. And I think myself, if I were to run for public office, I mean, well, you boxed a kid in, his ears when you were in 6th grade or something like that. That would be the headlines. So it is something that we have an acute need for, is to lift up the ideal of what leadership really is, which is service to mankind and to our fellow man.
Can I add something to that? That may divide what we see in the nation's capital here, maybe some state capitals, from the lower levels of governance in the United States. If you go all the way down to communities, as you're saying, there's no problem with leadership. There's no problem with people in neighborhoods working together and doing things. That's what they do. That is one of the striking things of American society, which was reflected upon as early as Alexis de Tocqueville. One of the things that he remarked upon. We haven't changed in that. It's when you get up to the higher levels where you have to raise tons of money in order to run for, let's say, president or Congress. A lot of people who look at this don't realize or understand that most of the money in a political campaign goes to buy time on television, but not even produce the ads, but to buy the time, because we got rid of the fairness doctrine a number of years ago because various people didn't like it. We got rid of the idea that if you give this person, man or woman, time on television, somebody else has to have a chance. They got to buy it. They got to come up with the cash. And now the Supreme Court says that a corporation can be a person and they can give as much money as they want, or a labor union can give as much money. As a result, you have circumstances in which people who can't raise money get out of public life. One of the people I know in foreign affairs, what I consider the great statesman, was a member of Congress from Indiana, said, I give up because I have to raise $10,000 a week for my reelection. I don't have time to govern. And what do I have to do that for? To buy television time. Another thing that gets me is when the media said there are red states and blue states. That's nonsense. A red state means that you get maybe 53% of the vote against 47%, and for the blue states out there, what about the other people? We are all individuals and we all count. The fact that we happen to go one way or another, when you aggregate, doesn't deny the legitimate rights of the rest of us. And yet we're taught that somehow we're polarized. We are far less polarized as a people than we are told we're polarized. Because once you get down to the community level, people will stare at you and they'll say, what do you mean polarized? I deal with my friend over here. Jim Rosebush has been hitting it. We literally live across the street from one another. And we've never had a crossword. My dog doesn't poop on your front step, but I don't think you have a dog.
Oh, you know what? If he did, I would forgive you.
Forgive me. But we get along famously. Now, the fact is, he's in one political party, I'm in the other. So what? We are both old enough. Pete, I don't know if you are. I remember when people on Capitol Hill worked together with one another. when I worked for Ted Kennedy, he said one of the first rules is don't make an enemy of anybody up here on Capitol Hill. Never say anything negative. So when he wanted to do health, here's a guy on the left. Who did he pick to work on health with? Orrin Hatch, man from the right, from Utah. They worked like this to help the American people. Now, in other things, they might have disagreed about a lot of things, but they understood what they were elected for, which was to help the American people. Now I go up to Capitol Hill, and I was told a story by one member of one party who was in the House of Representatives. He said, the question about whether I go across the aisle and have a drink with the other guy, I said, that's unthinkable. It's unthinkable.
Yeah.
You know, all the time it's, and even let's go back to the Middle East. One of the reasons, I'll tell you for sure, because I was involved in it, when it came to the Egypt-Israel peace treaty, it got implemented so fast, and I was part of the implementation team, because the Egyptian military and the Israeli military had talked about it and planned for it for years, exchanged the plans, went to meetings. Sometimes I was there, sometimes I just happened to be sitting on the side. They worked it out in advance. So when the time came, they just implemented it. Military people, incidentally, are much better at this than others, because if it comes wrong, they die. All right.
I think that this is, and I'm so sorry, Pete, but I'm going to have to jump off here. But
Yeah.
the, what you talked about, Robert, about the fact that we're of different parties, we live across the street from each other, and we get along famously, can be reflected at a higher level as well. And that's, this is the greatness and root of America, that we are neighbors. But you see that in the case of Reagan, when we had the first bilateral in Geneva, Reagan insisted on having the first meeting with Gorbachev one-on-one, no officials whatsoever, only translators. And George Shultz, everyone else, they didn't like this at all. But Reagan insisted that if he could make a friend or come to a mutual understanding based on personal qualities and commitments with Gorbachev, that they could be successful together. That's how their relationship started. And Reagan was convinced that it had to start that way, where they understood each other. Even if they didn't agree on certain tactical things, they understood each other as human beings. And this and our conversation about leadership, I think, are essential. I'd love to come back. Always.
Yeah, let's do it again
with Robert. But I'm going to have to say goodbye.
Yeah. Well, I'll wrap it up here. Anything in closing, Robert? Go ahead and take off, Jim. We'll catch up with you later.
Perfect. Great to be with you both.
We can get this done. It's going to have to start as something we've stopped doing, which is to educate the next generation, the current generation, on American history, on American civics, on all the things that are necessary, not just for community level, but for governance. Respect for the institutions, make the institutions work, compromise. Today I'll win, tomorrow I'll lose, you'll win, you'll lose, but together we're going to rebuild this nation.
I love it. All right, stand by. I'll come right back and say goodbye to you.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you